Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second week of the Recruiter Skill Session in the Jobvite Summer to Evolve series. Last week, you had a chance to talk with Natalie about recruitment marketing, and this week, I'll be discussing candidate screening best practices. So before we get into the presentation, I just want to introduce myself to you and give you some background information. My name is Carly Sapp, and I am a customer success training developer here at Jobvite. I've been with the company for a little over 2 years, and if you are a current customer, you might recognize my voice from a release webinar, maybe from another training session, and so maybe even a in-person boot camp. But for those of you who I haven't met, or maybe you're not a current customer, I do always like to tell everyone I was actually a Jobvite customer myself. And so I've been in recruiting. I totally understand the highs and lows of scheduling interviews, doing all of the phone screens, and then specifically doing all of the candidate screening. So with all that information out of the way, I just wanted to say I'm really excited to get to talk to you today about this subject in particular because I've been there, and I hope that these best practices really help with you and your team and finding the ideal fit for your company. So with that, I'm going to go ahead, stop talking, and just get right into the presentation. As I mentioned, this is week 2 of our 12-week Summer to Evolve series. Each week, we will release a recruiter skill session on Tuesdays, followed by 3 more days of content, which I'll be discussing at the end of the presentation. Now, since I've already told you about myself and my goals of teaching you the best practices for candidate screening, let's review what those best practices will include. Today, you're going to learn about what is the resume screening process and how can you use an ATS software similar to Jobvite to automate that process. I'll also go over how to use screening questions and how to evaluate resumes for skills and qualifications. Finally, we'll take a look at creating and using screening checklists, and then I'll wrap up with a summary of the best practices that we've covered today. So before we jump into what is the resume screening process, it's important to know how resumes are coming across your desk. According to the Jobvite 2020 Job Seeker Nation survey, 28% of workers are applying through a job board, while closely behind at 23% are through referrals. So whether those are friends or former colleagues, the percentage of referrals has actually surpassed applying through a company's career site. With that in mind, oftentimes those resumes are now coming to you through emails, or if you have an applicant tracking system or an ATS, then you're getting these referrals in larger quantities than in the past. Now, across industries, recruiters are all too familiar with the process of reviewing resumes. Whether the position is easy or difficult to fill, the number of candidates versus the number of qualified candidates are usually disproportionate. The resume screening process gives recruiters the chance to review the skills and experience of a candidate in order to determine if they would be a qualified fit for the role. Now, I would bet that majority of you watching this today have stories about very lengthy and manual resume screening processes. For example, I used to collect paper resumes at career fairs and would quickly jot down a note to try and help me remember the person and did I think they were qualified in that moment or not. So again, while a paper resume used to be the norm, now recruiters are receiving applications through online forms that they themselves might have created. So this is where an ATS software like Jobvite would play a large role in saving your talent acquisition team time while also boosting efficiency and consistency in your resume screening process. Now, I do think it's critical to note that the Jobvite Job Seeker Nation survey that I mentioned earlier actually collected data in Q1 and Q2 of 2020. And as you're aware, hiring during a global pandemic is not really something that they teach you in HR 101. So finding out in the last 3 months alone, 56% of workers view a good resume as more important now than they did 3 months ago. That means that 56% of workers are putting the effort into creating what they believe is the perfect resume to impress you. Now, by using an ATS to automate the screening process, those efforts won't be lost or overlooked. In fact, removing unqualified candidates automatically will allow your talent acquisition team the time and energy to focus on setting up interviews with the best of the best applying to join your team. Now, screening questions can help gather additional job-specific candidate data without having to go through the process of reaching out, scheduling a phone screen, and then trying to determine that type of data. So for example, you might want to find out specific coding skills from a software engineer that may not have been clearly defined by just looking at their resume. You can even use screening tools for a skills assessment by requiring a sample of their work that would be necessary for the role. Now, in addition to being able to narrow down your candidate pool, one of the biggest advantages of using an ATS is to automate communication with both the qualified and unqualified applicants. While some may argue that using automated emails can seem less personal, in reality, with an ATS like Jobvite, you can actually customize your messages to sound just like you. And I know that if I hear back from a company, even if it's the outcome that I wasn't hoping for, that really goes a long way with me. So even if somebody isn't qualified today, a positive candidate experience can still make them want to reapply once they've got the skills, once they've got more experience, and even from a rejection, they could still want to come back to your team. So now you might be asking yourself, how do you use screening questions? First, as a best practice, you should really keep the number of screening questions around 3 to 5. So too many screening questions could lose your applicant if they feel as though they're providing answers that would either be included on a resume or that would really be more relevant in an interview. Which brings me to my second best practice. To really save your talent team some time, I would use screening questions very early in the process. I like to think of a pre-screening form as a gate into the interview process. So if I create a pre-screening form with questions that are weighted and scored, then based on the outcome, the applicant can be knocked out due to a low score, or they can actually be knocked further into your process with a high score. Now, once your high-scoring candidates have pushed through the gate, you might decide their score is high enough to send their resume straight to the hiring manager for review. Or if the score was good, but you still have questions, then you can schedule a recruiter phone screen and you can interview them before the hiring manager step. So as you can see, there's really a great deal of potential that these questions can have on your hiring process. One of the statistics that I found interesting from the Jobvite 2020 Job Seeker Nation survey was that 10% of applicants either lied or inflated information on their resume. Now, whether you think 10% is high or low, the fact is that fluffing a resume can be fairly easy to do with the right industry buzzwords. So before reviewing a resume, have qualifying questions that are specific to the role or even the location of the role. Now, I know there have been times when I had a candidate claim they did not realize a position would require travel or even relocation, and then they withdrew from the process after being in it for some time. In hopes to avoiding those situations, you could have a screening question like, are you willing to relocate? Or are you able to travel up to 50% of the year for this role? Now, depending on their answer, you can find out right away if this candidate is going to meet that minimum requirement. Also, your questions and answers, they can be as simple as a yes or no format. So determining minimum requirements doesn't have to be complicated. In fact, here are some examples of questions that are commonly asked. In example A, a minimum number of years of experience. For this type of question, I would suggest using a drop-down list, a radio button, or even a checkbox where you can only allow for one check. But if you have this as an open-ended text, you would have to consider weighting and scoring your answers based on any number that the candidate might type in. So again, screening doesn't need to be difficult. Part of the best practice of creating questions is also how you create and format your answers. Now, I like using the years of experience example to also demonstrate how one question could knock a candidate in or out. So let's say that your team has decided the accountant role you're hiring for requires at least 5 years of experience. And then your answers are going to range from 0 to 2 years, 3 to 4, or 5 plus. While you could say anything below 5 would knock a candidate out, if you're still struggling to get many of those 5 plus year candidates, then those 3 to 4 year candidates may be worth taking a look at. So you could send those with 0 to 2 years into a reject later status. And I say reject later because, again, I want to stress that you want to communicate for those that are knocked out. However, you don't want to communicate too soon. So to have a good candidate experience, set kind of delay so that whatever question they answer that would knock them out wouldn't result in an immediate email saying that they aren't in the process. Now, back on topic, for those who do respond with 3 or 4 years of experience, they could actually be put in a status of new or please review. And then as a recruiter, you can review their resume before determining if they should go on to see a hiring manager. Now, anyone who answers 5 years plus, they could actually skip the whole phrase and phase of having to be in the new status, the recruiter review status, and they'll just go straight to a hiring manager for their review. So again, this is one example of a great question to use for screening. However, here are 2 other commonly used questions. In example B, for certifications, licenses, and highest level of education, this can also determine whether or not a candidate should be knocked further into an interview stage. Perhaps the role requires a master's degree, but those with a bachelor's could still be considered, so you would want either a drop-down list or a checkbox type answer. However, if you're asking about certifications and licenses, I would use an open-ended text, and the question could ask them to please list any additional certifications or licenses relevant to this position. Now, for example, C, work authorization will really depend on the compliance laws for your country. So while I would suggest getting with your legal team to make sure that the phrasing of your question is compliant, the answer could still be a simple yes or no response, which would then obviously knock that candidate in or out of your process. There are plenty of screening questions that your company could use that are very specific to you, but again, just make sure you're keeping them clear, they're simple, and they're short. Now let's say your candidate has made it past the pre-screening questions and you want to determine if their resume displays the skills and qualifications that really go beyond whether or not they would travel or relocate for a position. As I mentioned before, looking for industry buzzwords on the resume is important. Are they using them correctly, or does it look like they added these words just to match the job description as closely as possible? While I do prefer using screening questions as a gate, the other time you can use a skills assessment is going to be during the early phase of interviewing as more of a checkpoint. Now, during my time as a recruiter, I did learn that past performance could be very indicative of future performance, and I was always taught to review previous work history, specifically looking at duration. Now, I do believe that it's important to evaluate if a past work longevity is a pattern that could result in a red flag. However, given with all of the recent events, recruiters and hiring managers should look past the dates and look into the circumstances around maybe downsizing or even acquisitions. There is absolutely nothing wrong with asking for more details about this in a recruiter phone screen, especially if you do think that the rest of their resume really looks like a good match. Now finally, check the stats. A resume that includes quantitative information always stands out because a person willing to put hard numbers into their description of success gives you insight to them just beyond soft skills. While some positions are easier to quantify results, every position has goals that need to be met, and so I would really look for those to be mentioned somehow on a resume. Now, reviewing a one-page resume can take as little as 10 seconds if you know what to look for. And even though I'm sure that most of us would spend closer to a full 60 seconds, only reviewing the resumes of the most qualified candidates is still an overall process improvement. Now, we've discussed the importance of screening questions and using ATS software like Jobvite to narrow down your candidate pool to only the most qualified candidates. However, one area we need to touch base on goes back to one of my first slides, and that's how resumes are coming through to your team. While I discuss the screening checklist I have on my screen, I do want to challenge you to maybe pause this video and think about one role that you've struggled to get good candidates for. Now that you have your job in mind, my next challenge to you is ask yourself these questions. Where did we have this job posted? What does our job description even look like? What are our minimum requirements and our preferred qualifications for this role? That last question is what's going to help you create your pre-screening questions or your pre-screening form. So let's talk about what is the difference between saying minimum requirements and preferred qualifications. Really, this is just deciding if your candidate needs to have something for a job or just you want them to have something for a job, sort of an added bonus. So for example, a minimum requirement for an HR business partner role could be to have 5 or more years of experience in human resources. But a preferred qualification would be if they have a PHR. Now, when determining these qualifications, I would also suggest leaning on not only the hiring manager, but also a subject matter expert. Look at the highest performing person on that team and really evaluate what skills do they have, are they truly required versus preferred. I think that can really go a long way, and the more you work together as a team, the better the results. Next, using an ATS or some other type of AI tool like video screening or texting can really help automate your process. When I was hired at Jobvite, I had to do a video screen, and that gave my hiring manager a chance to see not only how I answered the questions, but how I presented myself, which was a really key factor in what my job entails. That also leads me to my next point, and that is to create a clear and accurate job description. It's great to include information about the company culture and benefits, but just make sure you're including all of the necessary bullet points for giving a realistic view of what the role is and what is expected. Finally, these next few points really go together because your team should be posting your jobs in a myriad of places. If you want a diverse group of candidates, you need to consider a diverse group of job boards. Based on the quantity and quality of applicants, your team might need to adjust their sourcing strategy, which again, that can even come down to just how you word your job descriptions. So as you start to rethink your candidate screening process, I would urge you to create a checklist or even use this one as a foundation for just figuring out a way to hire quickly, efficiently, and most importantly, hiring those quality candidates for your company. Now, as I wrap up here, I really want to review some of the best practices mentioned today because they all do result in a more consistent candidate screening process. One of the most HR-friendly concepts is consistency when it comes to hiring, and one of the ways to really make it easier on your team to remain consistent is by using an applicant tracking system. An ATS can do everything from storing candidate information in one place, and it can assist with scheduling interviews, it can create and keep evaluations, and of course, it can screen candidates for you using more than one method, like video or text. Finally, when it comes to qualifications of the candidate, just make your talent acquisition team agree on what they think the ideal candidate could look like. But also, they need to realize that they need to have very specific questions created for each role. So being a good communicator and a team player, that's always ideal. But I also want my team player to be able to communicate exactly what the job is that they're applying to. So don't let your questions be too generic and too high level. Get into those details because you want the best candidate possible. Now, I really hope that you did enjoy today's recruiter skill session class about candidate screening best practices. I hope some of you feel like you walked away learning a lot, and maybe for others, you felt like this was a great reminder. But we are going to be continuing on with this theme of candidate screening. So our next Summer to Evolve events this week are actually going to take place Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So on Wednesday, we have our 2 Talented Candidate Screening webinar. On Thursday, we have a Jobvite demo day, where we talk about how to qualify candidates quicker in the application process. And then finally, Friday is the Break Room Recruiter Real Talk. It's a live webinar where you can hear about screening quickly and effectively using tech. Now, next week's Summer to Evolve theme is going to be around recruiting roles and skills, but for a full list of events and for more detailed descriptions of each one of these, please visit the summertoevolve.com website. And also get social and use our hashtag JobviteS2E. I just want to say thank you again for taking the time to listen today, and I really look forward to the next time I get to share with you. Have a great day.